The sun was shining very bright and hot over the village market of Olo, making everyone sweat as they moved around to buy and sell their goods. It was a very busy afternoon because it was the main market day, and people had come from all the nearby villages to trade yams, red oil, vegetables, and goats. John stood in front of his small shop where he sold beautiful Anka fabrics, and he was shouting the prices to the women walking past him. He was wearing a light blue shirt because the heat was too much for heavy clothes, but many of the older men were walking proudly in their big flowing agbada robes. The market was full of loud noises, with chickens crying out from their cages and women laughing as they argued about the price of pepper and tomatoes. John wiped the sweat from his forehead with a small handkerchief and looked at the woman standing in front of him, who wanted to buy a green and yellow fabric. She was wearing a red wrapper tied around her waist and a matching head tie that was twisted in a very stylish way. She told John that his price was too high, and she held the money in her hand tightly, as if she did not want to let it go. John smiled at her and told her that the fabric was the best quality in the whole market, and that she would look like a queen if she wore it to church on Sunday. While they were talking, a young boy ran past them pushing a wheelbarrow full of heavy yam tubers, and he was shouting for people to leave the way so he would not hit them. The smell of roasted corn and fish was in the air, making John feel a little bit hungry even though he had eaten breakfast. Dust was rising from the ground because of the many feet walking up and down, and the whole place felt alive with energy and movement. John leaned forward to take the money from the woman, and he opened his mouth to tell her thank you for buying from him. Just as his hand touched the money, a strange feeling hit his chest like a heavy stone, and the whole world suddenly changed in a way he could not understand. John waited for the woman to put the money in his hand, but she did not move her hand forward, and she did not blink her eyes. He looked at her face and saw that her mouth was half open, as if she was about to speak, but no sound was coming out of her throat. John felt very confused, so he waved his hand in front of her face to see if she would react, but she stood there like a statue made of stone. He turned his head to look at the boy with the wheelbarrow, and he was shocked to see the boy frozen in the middle of a step with one leg in the air. The dust that was rising from the ground around the boy's feet was also frozen in the air, hanging there like small brown clouds that refused to fall down or blow away. John stepped out of his shop slowly, looking around the market with his heart beating very fast in his chest because he had never seen anything like this before. He saw a man selling roasted corn, and the smoke from the fire was stuck in the air in gray twisted shapes that did not move even a little bit. A bird that was flying across the sky had stopped right above the market stalls, its wings spread wide open, simply hanging in the empty air without falling. The loud noise of the market was completely gone, leaving a silence that was so heavy it felt like it was pressing against John's ears. He walked into the middle of the crowd, careful not to touch anyone because he was afraid that they might break or fall over. He saw his friend Peter laughing with another man, but the laugh was silent, and their faces were frozen in a happy expression that now looked very scary. John shouted Peter's name as loud as he could, but his voice just disappeared into the open air, and nobody turned to look at him. He touched the hot metal of a cooking pot near him, and even the boiling oil inside was still, like a picture painted on a wall. Panic started to rise in John's throat because he realized that he was the only person in the whole village who was still alive and moving. As John stood there shaking with fear in the silent market, he saw something moving far away at the edge of the market near the big Iroquois tree. A man was walking towards him, but this man did not walk like the villagers. He moved smoothly as if he was floating just above the dusty ground. The man was wearing a very old style of clothing, a dirty brown abaya that looked like it had been buried in the ground for many years. John wanted to run away, but his legs felt too heavy, so he just stood there and watched the stranger come closer and closer. The stranger had a face that looked very hard and dry, like old leather that has been left in the sun for too long. He did not look at the frozen people or the floating dust. His dark eyes were fixed only on John. When the stranger reached the place where John was standing, he stopped and looked at John with eyes that made John feel very cold, even though the sun was hot. The stranger did not say hello or ask how John was doing, but instead, he pointed a long, bony finger directly at John's chest. "You are the one," the stranger said, and his voice sounded like dry leaves crunching under a foot. "You are the one who is awake when everyone else sleeps the sleep of time." John tried to speak, but his mouth was dry, so he had to swallow hard before he could ask the man who he was and what was happening. "I am the keeper," the stranger said without changing his expression, "and I have come to collect a debt that you have owed for a very long time." John shook his head because he did not owe anybody money, and he told the stranger that he was a debt-free man who paid for his goods on time. The stranger laughed, but it was not a funny sound. It was a cold sound that made the hair on John's arms stand up. "You have stolen time before," the stranger said clearly. "Now you must return it." John looked at the stranger with anger, because he was a good man who went to church and helped his neighbors whenever they were in need. "I have never stolen anything in my life," John said, his voice shaking a little bit because he was scared, but he also wanted to defend his name. "I work hard selling my Ankara fabrics, and I use my own money to feed my family." The stranger did not blink, and he walked slowly around John in a circle, looking at him from his head to his feet. "It is not money that you stole, John," the stranger said softly. "You stole years of life that did not belong to you, and you have been using them freely." John stepped back and bumped into the frozen woman who wanted to buy his fabric, but she did not move even an inch. "You are crazy!" John shouted at the stranger. "Fix this thing now! Look at these people, they're stuck! My customers, my friends, they're not moving!" The stranger stopped walking and stood very close to John, so close that John could smell the scent of old earth and dry roots coming from him. "They are stuck because of you," the stranger said. "Time has stopped because the account is empty, and nature has come to take what is hers." John felt tears burning in his eyes because he did not understand what was happening, and he felt like he was in a terrible nightmare. "I don't know what you are talking about," John cried out. "Please, just let time start again. I want to go home to my wife and my son." The stranger shook his head slowly. "Time cannot start until the debt is paid, and you do not have much time to decide." The stranger reached into the deep pocket of his brown agbada and pulled out an old object that looked like a pocket watch, but it had no hands, only a dark shadow spinning inside it. "Do you want to know the price of this frozen time?" the stranger asked John, holding the strange object up so John could see the shadow spinning. "What price?" John asked, staring at the object. "Nobody is moving, so nothing is happening." "You are wrong," the stranger said with a cruel smile. "While time stands still here for you, it is eating away at the lives of everyone else in this market." John felt a cold feeling in his stomach as he looked around at the hundreds of people in the market. "What do you mean?" John whispered. "For every 1 minute that time remains frozen like this," the stranger explained slowly, "someone in this market loses 1 full year of their life when time starts again." John gasped and covered his mouth with his hands because the news was too terrible to believe. "That cannot be true," John said. "That means if we stand here for 10 minutes, 10 people will lose a year, or 1 person will lose 10 years. "It is worse," the stranger corrected him. "Every minute past takes a year from someone. It could be the old woman selling pepper, or the young boy with the wheelbarrow, or your best friend." John looked at the boy with the wheelbarrow again. He was so young, maybe only 12 years old. If he lost 10 years of his life, he would suddenly become a grown man, or maybe he would just get sick and weak. "You must stop it!" John screamed, grabbing the stranger's arm, but the arm felt as hard as a tree branch. "I cannot stop it," the stranger said calmly. Only you can stop it, because you are the cause. We have been talking for 2 minutes already, the stranger said while looking at the spinning shadow in his hand. That means 2 years have already been taken from the people in this market. John panicked and started running through the frozen market, looking into the faces of the people he knew and loved. He saw Mama Ngozi, the old woman who always gave him free groundnuts. She was already old, and if she lost years, she might die immediately when time started. He ran past the stall where the meat sellers were chopping meat, their big knives hanging in the air above the wooden tables. John was looking for someone specific, and his heart was pounding so hard against his ribs that it hurt him. He found them near the center of the market, where the big umbrellas provided shade from the sun. It was his wife Sarah and his little son David who was holding a bright blue toy car. Sarah was smiling down at David, and David was pointing at something in the distance, his small finger frozen in the air. John fell to his knees in the dust in front of them, tears streaming down his face and soaking into his blue shirt. "Not them, please God, not them," John begged, touching his wife's hand, which was warm but hard as rock. The stranger appeared behind John silently, his shadow falling over John's family. "They are part of the market," the stranger said. "The years could be taken from the boy. Imagine him losing 10 or 20 years before he even grows up." John stood up and grabbed the stranger by the collar of his dirty agbada. "Tell me what I did!" John shouted. "Tell me how to fix it before my son loses his life!" "Think back, John," the stranger said, pushing John away easily. "Think back to the night in the forest 20 years ago." John froze, and for a moment he was as still as the people in the market, because the memory hit him like a blow to the head. He remembered the village where he was born, a place far away from here, where the elders followed very dark traditions. He remembered being a young man, only 20 years old, and being dragged into the forest by the village priests. "You remember now," the stranger said, watching John's face change from anger to horror. "You were chosen for the sacrifice to bring a good harvest to your village." "I escaped," John whispered, his voice trembling. "I ran away in the night. I broke the ropes and I ran until my feet bled." "Yes," the stranger nodded. "You were supposed to die that night. Your time was finished. That was the agreement your ancestors made." John looked at his hands, remembering how he had cut the ropes with a sharp stone he found on the ground. "I wanted to live," John said. "Is it a crime to want to live? I didn't kill anyone. I just ran away." "You cheated death," the stranger said sternly. "When you ran away, you stole time. Every day you have lived for the last 20 years was a stolen day. You should have been dead." John felt weak. He realized that his whole life, his business, his marriage to Sarah, the birth of his son David, all of it was built on time that did not belong to him. "But why is this happening now?" John asked. "Why today?" "Because the balance must be corrected," the stranger replied. "You have used too much. The vessel is empty. Nature cannot support a dead man walking anymore." John looked at his wife and son again. He had built a life with them, but he was never supposed to be there to meet them. "So everyone here is suffering because of me?" John asked, looking around the silent market with a heavy heart. "Yes," the stranger answered. "Because you refused to give your one life. Now many lives are being consumed to keep the balance." John walked over to a young girl who was selling pure water. She had a tray on her head and a bright smile on her face. If time stayed frozen for another 10 minutes, this girl might lose 10 years of her youth. She would wake up and suddenly be older, her body weaker, her time on earth shorter, and she would not even know why. John felt a guilt so heavy that it almost crushed him to the ground. He had thought he was lucky to escape that night in the forest. He had thanked God every day for his escape, but now he realized that his luck was actually a curse that was falling on innocent people. "I am a thief," John said quietly to himself. "I am the biggest thief in this market." He looked at the stranger. "How many minutes have passed now?" 5 minutes, the stranger said, looking at the shadow in his hand. 5 years have been taken. Maybe from your wife. Maybe from the water girl. Maybe from the corn seller. John screamed in frustration and kicked the dust. Take me then! Take my life now! If I was supposed to die then, let me die now and leave these people alone. The stranger shook his head. It is not that simple anymore. The debt has grown too big with interest. Your life alone is not enough to restart the clock. What do you mean my life is not enough? John shouted. I am the one who ran away. Take me! The rules of the old magic are different now, the stranger explained calmly. To unlock time and save the rest of the years for these people, a fresh sacrifice must be made. The stranger stepped closer to John and lowered his voice. You must choose one person in this market, just one. That person will age instantly and die in your place to settle the debt. John stared at the stranger with wide eyes. You want me to kill someone? You want me to point at an innocent person and say, die? It is the only way, the stranger said. If you do not choose in the next 5 minutes, time will stay frozen forever. And slowly, the life will drain out of everyone here until the whole market is a graveyard. John looked at the hundreds of people. He saw old men, young women, little children and babies tied to their mothers' backs. I cannot do it, John said, shaking his head. I cannot choose someone to die. Then you choose for everyone to die, the stranger said coldly. Is that what a good man does? You kill 1,000 to save your conscience from killing one? John felt like throwing up. It was a terrible trap. Either he becomes a murderer of one, or a murderer of all. You have 5 minutes left, the stranger said. Find someone. Point to them. And the debt will be paid. John started walking through the market again, but this time his legs felt like lead. He looked at the face of the man selling shoes. He was a greedy man who sometimes cheated people. Should I choose him? John thought, but then he saw the man's wedding ring and thought about his family waiting at home. No, he could not do it. He walked past a beggar sitting on the ground. The beggar was old and sick. Maybe him? John thought. He is already suffering. But then John remembered that the beggar always prayed for people and had a kind heart. It was not John's right to say his life was worth less. Every face John looked at was a person with a story, a family, and a future. He saw a thief who had just stolen a yam and was running away frozen in stride. The thief? John thought. But stealing a yam does not deserve death. The time was ticking. The stranger was following him, counting the seconds. 6 minutes gone, the stranger called out. 6 years lost. John was sweating so much that his shirt was soaked. He looked at his friends, his customers, strangers. He could not find anyone he hated enough to kill. He could not find anyone who deserved to die so that John could live. And then he realized the truth. He was looking for someone to take his punishment. He was still trying to escape, just like he did in the forest 20 years ago. John circled back to the center of the market where his family stood frozen. He looked at his wife Sarah, who loved him and cooked for him. He looked at his son David, who looked just like him. 7 minutes, the stranger said. John looked across the aisle from his shop. Standing there, frozen, while holding a heavy bag of rice, was his older brother Samuel. Samuel had come to visit the village today to buy supplies. John looked at Samuel, and a deep, painful memory came back to him. On that night in the forest 20 years ago, it was Samuel who had loosened the ropes. It was Samuel who had whispered, "Run, John, run and don't look back." Samuel had stayed behind to face the anger of the elders. Samuel had been punished, beaten, and shamed, but he had never told anyone where John went. Samuel had saved John's life. John looked at Samuel's tired face. Samuel had aged faster than John because of the hard labor he did in the village. Samuel loved John more than anyone. "I recognize the person," John said, his voice shaking. The stranger stepped forward. "Who is it? Point to them." John looked at Samuel. If he chose Samuel, Samuel would die. But Samuel had already risked his life for John once. Maybe Samuel would understand. Maybe it was Samuel's destiny to save his little brother again. 8 minutes, the stranger warned. Make your choice. John looked at Samuel, then he looked at his son David, then at the stranger. He realized that the person he must choose was not a stranger. It had to be someone whose life was linked to the debt. I have made my choice, John said, his voice becoming strong for the first time. He walked over to his brother Samuel and placed his hand on Samuel's shoulder. The stranger smiled, thinking John was going to sacrifice his brother. A wise choice, the stranger said. The brother who saved you dies so you can keep the life he gave you. John looked at Samuel with love, then he took his hand off Samuel's shoulder and turned around to face the stranger. No, John said, I choose the only person who is responsible. John pointed his finger firmly at his own chest. I choose myself. The stranger's smile vanished. You cannot. The debt requires a sacrifice. You are the debtor. I am the one who stole the time, John said, and I am the one who will pay for it. If I die, the stolen years are returned. The account is closed. If you do this, the stranger said, looking surprised, you will not just die, you will cease to exist. All the years you lived, your marriage, your son, will be erased like a dream. John looked at David and Sarah one last time. It broke his heart to know he would leave them. But if he stayed, he would destroy them. I choose myself, John shouted. Take me! Suddenly, the wind started to blow. The dust fell to the ground. The noise of the market exploded back into the air. Buy your fine Ankara, here! A woman shouted. The chickens cried out. The boy with the wheelbarrow completed his step. Samuel dropped the bag of rice and looked around, confused. John, he called out. John, where are you? He looked at the shop where John's Ankara fabrics were hanging. The fabrics were there, colorful and bright. The stool where John usually sat was there. But John was gone. Sarah looked around, holding David's hand. Where's your father? She asked, looking puzzled. She felt a strange sadness in her heart, but she couldn't remember why. The market continued, busy and loud. The sun shone down on the village of Olo. Time moved forward, ticking second by second, paid for by the man who was no longer there.